Welcome to the Buzz Around Bees. So this episode is episode 1 of season 3. We're glad to be back with you again this year, and we're glad to have you with us. This year, in the middle of our filming here, we are in the midst of a global pandemic. We have what they call the coronavirus, which is putting the entire world on basically a lockdown. Unemployment is ridiculously high, the economy's terrible, but we're grateful that we can still play with the bees and do this show. There's a thing called social distancing now, where they want everybody 6 feet apart, which has helped flatten the curve on this terrible disease. And most people, when you're out in public, need to wear masks. Normally, I would be doing this show with another person, but because of those guidelines, we're not going to do that. I'm going to do it alone. So, during the winter, when we were talking about what we wanted to bring this year for shows, we've brought you all kinds of episodes with putting bees in hives and inspecting them and looking for the queen and looking for the egg and larva and doing sugar shakes and doing all kinds of inspections, showing you how we extract the honey. But it came to us that we've never really done a show about the hive itself. So today what we're going to do is we're going to show you what we call the anatomy of a hive. So what we're going to put together is the basic standard Langstroth hive. It was invented in 1851 by Reverend Lorenzo Langstroth. So this here is technically not part of the hive. This is what I call the base. It doesn't have to be this elaborate, but you need to elevate the hives off the ground, be it a foot or 18 inches, and there's a number of reasons why, but one is to keep pests out of the hive, and one of the other reasons is so you're able to get up and mow underneath the hive. It also helps with moisture. So it doesn't have to be like this. It can be 2 cement blocks with a piece of wood on it, but I had some of these made, so this is the base. What I have in my hand is actually the first part of the hive, and it's called the hive stand. And the entire hive will rest on this. The entire body will rest on this piece of wood, which will be on that. And this also has what we refer to as a landing board. So as you see, as we start to build this, that the bees will land here as they go into the hive. So as I've said many times in the past, over the last few years doing this show, that if you asked 3 beekeepers the same question, you would get 5 answers. And that actually goes forward with putting this hive together. Some of it is actually scientific and some of it is objective. Now, what I have here is the bottom board. Well, I happen to use a screen bottom board, and this is actually optional. So this goes in next. And as you're going to see, we're going to just build this thing perfectly square. So this is the screen bottom board, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a piece of cardboard underneath this, and what that does is it helps with ventilation, it prevents the real cold getting in, and when there's varroa mites and stuff, the things land on this board. We'll talk about some of those things in a later episode. So this is the board that we're going to slide in here. There's actually grooves. It's numbered, it's lettered. It helps later on down the road, and you'll find out in another lesson what we're talking about. And that goes in and fits perfectly. Now this is also something that's optional, but it's called a slatted bottom board. And this also helps in ventilation. Again, optional, you don't need this, but I happen to use them. A slatted bottom board. So the next piece that we're putting on is really the main body. This is the deep, and this is the lower deep. This is where the queen lays her eggs. This is the brood chamber. So this goes on next, and once again we want to line these things up. And we have inside here, I use 10 frames. This is the frame. They have all these little hexagonal spots where the queen will lay the egg. So once the bees are installed, there'll be many thousands of bees in here, and this is where she lays the eggs and the brood, and later on you're going to add another one of these because there'll be so many babies that you need to build up a little bit further. So now the next piece, just for the sake of this show, is a medium super. So let's pretend that you have 2 of these on, chock full of bees, brood. Now we're going to add the medium super. This is 6 5/8, and these are really the honey chambers. This is where we store the honey. The bees move up, and these frames, as you can see, are a little bit smaller. And again, we use the 10 frames. Now, what would go between these, between the deeps and the supers, is what they call a queen excluder. I actually can't find my queen excluder right now, but it's a little grate that goes between these two. And the purpose of it is exactly what it sounds like. It prevents the queen from going down here, up in here to the honey storage area. Because what you don't want is you don't want the queen laying eggs in the honey. So what happens is these little holes in it, and they're small enough to allow the worker bee through to come up as they move upward, but it does not allow the drones or the queen to move on up. So again, what would happen is you'd have 2 of these. Once this gets about 80% full, there's different theories and different ways that you could actually start to take these out and replace them with empty frames and take the honey. Or you could just simply add another one of these. And I've seen where people leave these on, and you could have 2 or 3. And as I say, if this was on the ground, it would be very difficult for you to be bending over and picking it up, because they get quite heavy. You know, later on in the year, these could have 75 pounds of honey in them that you want to leave for the bees to overwinter with. So in the spring, when you install your bee package, which again you're going to see in our next episode, you need to feed the bees for a while. And there's a formula that they use for mixing sugar and water to make sugar water, obviously. And what happens is this goes over this frame, but you fill, it would hold about 1 gallon. And what happens is the bees come up from the hive through here and into this screened area. And what happens is the sugar water will rise. The bees can climb down to it and drink it without drowning. There are many, many, many different types of these on the market. This happens to be what they call a top feeder. They have bottles that you can put in through the cover, which we'll show next. They have front feeders that you can put in. I happen to like these. It's pretty easy to use, and you don't have to actually get into the hive early in the year to feed the bees. So the next piece that goes on top is what they call the inner cover. So it's a little elevated. It creates a dead space. So it goes on top of this for now, but this will come off once we have a nectar flow. These come off. So probably for a few weeks, 3 or 4 weeks into the beginning of the season, you will feed the bees the sugar water. And as you see, when they stop drinking it and there's a good flow, you take this off. But this comes on and it's slatted, as you can see. It's got a slat in it, and it goes on the hive as such. Whoop. Go like this. So the bees can come up and actually use this kind of little thing here on the back as an escape hatch. But this is also good for ventilation and protecting the bees, but it's something that's very important that you have to have on the hive. So now what we're going to put on is what they call a telescoping top cover. So as you can see, this is covered with aluminum. This fits right over everything. Very, very important. This protects the entire hive from the elements. The rain, the wind, the snow. A suggestion that everybody has is putting a weight or a rock or something on top of this so it doesn't blow off in bad weather and then expose the hive. But this is an extremely important piece. It's the telescoping cover. So finally what we have is this little thing here called the entrance reducer. And as you can see, it's got one size opening here, and then you have a different size opening here. So this goes here. So at the beginning of the year, you put it in like so, it fits in perfectly. So the bees will fly in and they'll land on the landing board, and they'll go into the hive through that little hole. And why are there different holes? Well, you can change the positions during the year, and sometimes you just take the whole entrance reducer out. But keeping it in there helps the newly established colony. Not robbers and stuff can't come in, and that's something we'll talk about in another episode. But it limits the size of the opening to get into the hive, so it protects the bees that are trying to establish a new colony. It also helps in colder weather, keeping it warm, which is extremely important. So that's pretty much it. It's a little simplified version because later on during the season what you'll do is you'll add and then you'll take this off. But basically that's the Langstroth hide. So we also want to talk about some of the tools and the equipment that you need when you're a beekeeper, and things that are a must. One of them is the smoker. And I know that we talked about this a couple years ago. We'll do it again later this year. But this is the smoker. You open it up, you put some paper, some wood chips, whatever it takes to build a nice little fire. Sometimes they use pellets, but you get a nice cool fire with a nice smoke. And when you use it, you come in, a couple of puffs into the hive there, you lift this, a couple of puffs here. It calms the bees down as it masks the smell of the queen, the pheromone from the queen. So that is an extremely important tool that you must have. The other thing that you have to have is a hive tool. They come in many shapes and sizes. So what this does is the bees make propolis, which is an extremely sticky substance. It's like a glue, and they use it to seal up different aspects, different holes, seams of the hive, which we can talk about in another episode as well. But you need this sometimes to pry the hive bodies or the frames apart. Extremely important is the hive tool. The other thing that I want to talk about are gloves. A lot of people don't wear gloves. People have tricks on when they put baby powder on their hands and they don't use gloves. Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. It depends on if I think I'm going to really aggravate the bees. I'll put gloves on sometimes, and that's depending on different conditions. So it's important to have a good pair of gloves that we wear. Now, in this day and age with the coronavirus, you hear a lot of talk about PPE, personal protection equipment. Beekeepers have been using PPE for decades and decades. Now, what do I mean? So the PPE here is a jacket with a veil. There are, and I'll show you a full suit, a bee suit. These are like a canvas and they're pretty thick, but bees will try to sting you through this. You never want one too tight because they can sting through this into your body. The veil, to me, is the most important part of anything that you do. I never go into a hive without a veil. You always want to have your face covered. You don't want to get stung in the eyes. You don't want to get stung in the mouth. Certainly not in the nose. I see videos and I see people going into hives without veils, and it just, I mean, some people do it. Some people have been doing it for years. This is pretty simple. This is just a jacket and a veil. Here is the full overalls that I use with the veil. Again, I would never go into a hive without a veil, and I would never recommend it to anybody. So that's pretty much it. That's pretty much the hive, the equipment that I can tell you for now. Again, I want to thank you for joining us and hope to see you in the next episode, which will be when we pick up the bees and install them in the hives.